Over 2,000 years ago, two powers, Rome and Carthage, fought over more than a century for the control of the Mediterranean. In 264 BCE, Rome controlled most of the Italian peninsula. Carthage dominated the seas and trade across North Africa, Spain, and beyond. The Punic Wars were empire-shaping showdowns that set the stage for Roman dominance for centuries. Now let's begin with some comparisons between Rome and Carthage. In the early 3rd century, both Rome and Carthage were city-state republics. In practice, both were ruled by a small group of elites. And they shared other similarities as well. By tradition, Rome was founded around 753 BCE, and Carthage was founded just a few decades earlier, around 813 BCE. By 264 BCE, many features of Greek culture had influenced both Roman and Carthaginian societies and religion. Rome and Carthage had been partners in trade and diplomacy for nearly 2.5 centuries, and their elites enjoyed reciprocal ties of friendship and hospitality. But in the 3rd century, these two republics fought against each other in 3 major wars that ultimately destroyed Carthage and made Rome the superpower of the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars permanently changed the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Rome was very large for a 3rd century city. It had an urban population of approximately 90,000. By 270 BCE, with the help of the army, Rome established control over the Italian peninsula. In Rome, all propertied males between the ages of 18 and 46 were eligible for military service and were recruited into the cavalry or the infantry. Now, the infantry was the most important branch of the Roman army, and the principal fighting formation was the legion. Military service was regarded as a mark of honor without which public recognition and advancement were virtually impossible, especially because it was only after 10 years of military service that a man could hold public office. Now, one thing to remember is that Rome did not have a strong navy at this time. Carthage, on the other hand, was known for its naval supremacy. The population of Carthage was approximately 200,000. The Carthaginian army consisted mostly of mercenaries recruited from the various subject territories. Now, each territory provided special military skills. Numidia supplied cavalry armed with spears and javelins. Now, these horsemen who rode without saddle or bridle had superb fighting skills both in the hills and on the plains. And slingers who were recruited from the Balearic Islands, they used 2 types of slings, one for long-range attacks against a densely packed enemy, and the other for close combats up to 600 feet. Infantry soldiers were recruited from the Spanish hill tribes, and they were experts at guerrilla warfare, and their basic weapon was a short sword for cutting and thrusting. The largest mercenary contingent came from modern-day Libya and Tunisia. The elephants that came mostly from the forests around Carthage at the foot of the Atlas Mountains and along the coast of Morocco. Although later on Hannibal obtained some Indian elephants from Egypt. Now, elephants were used to scare horses and the infantry. The navy played a very important role in Carthaginian warfare. And unlike its army, it was manned entirely by Carthaginians. And there were three basic types of ships: warships, large cargo vessels that could be converted to transport troops, and small general purpose vessels. Now let's review the First Punic War, which lasted from 264 to 241 BCE. Now most historians point to two main causes. The Romans saw an opportunity to gain a foothold in Sicily, and the Romans believed that the Carthaginians were unprepared militarily. The First Punic War was the first armed conflict in which Rome operated outside Italy. And this war was fought for the control of Sicily. Now, the island of Sicily was a key strategic location for both Rome and Carthage, and they both wanted to control it. In 264 BCE, there was a dispute over control of the city of Messana on Sicily, and that sparked the outbreak of a major war between Rome and Carthage. Now, at this time, Carthage had a powerful navy, but Rome did not. Carthage controlled most of the Western Mediterranean trade, including the important sea routes between Italy and Spain. Now, Rome wanted to control these routes and the wealth that came with them. The First Punic War lasted over 20 years and was fought mainly in Sicily and at sea. At first, Carthage had the upper hand in the war because of its superior navy. Carthage sent Hamilcar Barca to take command in Sicily. Hamilcar was a brilliant and charismatic general who terrorized the Romans in Sicily with lightning blows from the mountain heights and ravaged the coast of southern Italy with bold raids. Carthage then withdrew most of its ships from Sicily, presumably because of political, financial, or military pressures in Africa. The Carthaginians must have hoped that Rome would become tired of the stalemate and come to reasonable terms. Meanwhile, the Romans realized the war could not be won by land and quickly built its own fleet. A Carthaginian ship had run aground during a naval conflict. The Romans dismantled that ship and used it as a model to build their own fleet. In 241 BCE, Rome defeated Carthage and forced Carthage to give up control of Sicily, pay a large sum of money to Rome as reparations, and reduce the size of the Carthaginian fleet to just 10 warships. The Carthaginians paid indemnities to Rome for the next 50 years, and they were also obliged to send ships and grain to support Roman wars. Now, after the war ended, the Carthaginians didn't have sufficient funds to pay their large mercenary army, and that provoked rebellion among the mercenaries who were returning from the war. Hamilcar massacred thousands of rebels, and his ruthless tactics finally ended the uprising. But Carthage was profoundly weakened at the end of the First Punic War. Let's talk about the Second Punic War. This war lasted from 218 to 201 BCE. This was one of the largest wars in the Mediterranean and was fought across Italy, Spain, the Western Mediterranean islands, and North Africa. The Second Punic War ended in 201 BCE with the defeat of Carthage. So what led to the Second War? Sardinia was the main granary of the Carthaginians. Rome violated earlier agreements with Carthage and seized Sardinia in 238 BCE. When Carthage protested, the Romans responded by threatening war. Carthage was too exhausted to resist and agreed to pay an additional substantial indemnity and relinquished Sardinia. Hamilcar Barca viewed the aggressive Roman policy as a morally repulsive threat to Carthaginian survival. In the Second Punic War, Hamilcar Barca's son Hannibal was determined to avenge the loss of Sicily, Sardinia, and his father's humiliation. Now, this was the immediate cause of the war, but the overall setting was far more complex. Rome was in an expansion mode. In 220 BCE, Rome deliberately formed an alliance with the Spanish city of Saguntum, and this connection greatly escalated tensions between Rome and Carthage. Hannibal, who had assumed full command in Spain, considered the Roman alliance with Saguntum as a threat to his authority in Spain. Now, while the First Punic War took the form of naval battles for the control of Sicily, the Second Punic War unfolded mainly as a land struggle for the control of Spain and the Italian peninsula. Hannibal marched overland toward Italy, and his daring plan included crossing the Pyrenees, marching through southern Gaul, and descending upon Italy from the Alps. Now, this was a long and arduous land route. Several military strategists and generals through the ages have studied Hannibal's campaign. Hannibal was a brilliant strategist and charismatic leader who never lost a battle during his entire Italian expedition. He fully analyzed the terrain in planning military engagements and demonstrated exceptional genius in utilizing troops on the battlefield. Hannibal was not even 30 years old when he led his troops across the Pyrenees. He commanded a huge army of perhaps 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry and several elephants. Now, during the Second Punic War, Hannibal won many major battles, such as the Battle of Trebia in northern Italy, the Battle of Lake Trasimene in central Italy, and the famous Battle of Cannae in southern Italy. In 216 BCE, the battle took place at Cannae on flat terrain that favored Hannibal's superiority in cavalry. Now, the Carthaginian army crushed the Romans. It was a bloody battle in which only a small fraction of the Roman army escaped death or captivity. When news of this disaster reached Rome, the Roman Senate ordered the streets to be cleared of crying women, imposed silence in public places to discourage rumor and gossip, armed all males over the age of 16, formed 2 additional legions by freeing slaves, and curtailed the purchase of luxury items by women to free more money for the war effort. So you can imagine how disastrous this war was for the Romans. In 210 BCE, a Roman general named Scipio was appointed to the Spanish command. Scipio carefully studied Hannibal's strategies and eventually defeated him. For example, Scipio copied Hannibal's strategy at Cannae for a new, flexible Roman formation that could expand or contract quickly. He used this formation to defeat the Carthaginian armies in Spain. Hannibal's army was numerically very small compared to the Roman army. Yet, Hannibal had never lost a major battle in enemy territory for 15 years. In 202 BCE, the 2 greatest generals of the Second Punic War, Hannibal and Scipio, met at Zama, near Carthage. Carthage had superior forces, but the Romans were able to win the battle through a combination of strategy, tactics, and perseverance. Carthage was defeated and forced to accept harsh terms of surrender. Carthage was forced to give up Spain, limit its military forces, and pay a large indemnity to Rome and recognize the independence of Numidia. Rome also prohibited Carthage from waging a war without Rome's permission. Scipio returned to Rome in triumph and immortalized his victory by adding Africanus to his other names. He was now known as Scipio Africanus, and Scipio became the first Roman general to bear the name of the land he had conquered. After the war ended, the political elite of Carthage turned against Hannibal, one of the greatest military commanders in history. Hannibal fled from Carthage and he eventually committed suicide. Similarly, although Scipio was a great general, he was not skilled at navigating complex Roman politics. The Roman Senate accused Scipio of corruption. Eventually, Scipio went into voluntary exile, and some historians have suggested that he might have committed suicide. Let's briefly review some of the factors that contributed to Rome's stunning victory. The Roman cavalry. Scipio had trained his cavalry to be more mobile and flexible than the Carthaginian cavalry, and they were able to outmaneuver and defeat their opponents. Hannibal used elephants in the battle, but the Romans were able to neutralize this advantage by driving them off the field with javelins and other weapons. And by the time of the Battle of Zama, Hannibal had been fighting the Romans for over 15 years and his army was exhausted. Carthage lost some of its allies during the war, particularly after Rome's military successes. And this made it more difficult for them to sustain the war effort. At the end of the Second Punic War, Rome forced Carthage to recognize the independence of Numidia. In 151 BCE, Carthage stopped paying tribute to Numidia, and Rome used this as a pretext to launch a war against Carthage. That led to the third and final war between Rome and Carthage. Now let's move on and talk about the third and final Punic War that was fought from 149 BCE to 146 BCE. It was fought entirely in Carthaginian territory. This war was the result of efforts by Cato the Elder and other hawkish members of the Roman Senate to convince their colleagues that Carthage, even in its weakened state after losing two major wars, was a continuing threat to Rome's supremacy. Cato is remembered for his rallying cry, "Carthage must be destroyed." The Third Punic War was a short but bloody war. In 149 BCE, the Roman army landed in North Africa and just razed Carthage to the ground. They contaminated the soil with salt to make sure that nothing would grow easily. Carthage remained uninhabited until the city was refounded later by Julius Caesar. That was the end of Carthage, and that's how North Africa became a Roman province. The Punic Wars reshaped Roman society, military practices, and politics. They laid the foundation for the rise of powerful general civil wars and eventually the fall of the Republic itself. Thanks for watching. See you next time.